Yo bar, what's up and what's happening? The other day I made a video which was called Why Diets Are So Fucking Confusing. And basically in that video we touch on sugars or carbohydrate and where sugars come from. We touched on the ketogenic diet a little bit, and then we also looked at exercise and how those things affect your weight. Now the title of that video actually got me thinking, why are diets so fucking confusing? And some of the reason I believe why diets are confusing is because of people on social media. Now, I get it, I'm someone who is on social media, but people who are on social media who aren't necessarily giving out the correct information, although it always comes from a good place, I believe, it is sometimes incorrect and is not actually going to help you in the long run. So when we're looking at people on social media, I look at people such as James Smith. James Smith is a fitness YouTuber. He used to be a personal trainer. He's also released a few books, and in general, most of the content that he releases is really great. Now, the people who are on social media who create content which is around diet and around exercise, most of the time, these big YouTubers are completely correct. Okay, they have a good understanding or basic understanding of things such as weight loss and also how to do exercise more, what mindset you need to be in when you're doing exercise. Now, James Smith has released a few videos on his YouTube channel, which basically talk about calories in versus calories out, and the fact that if you eat or consume less calories, you are therefore going to lose weight because your overall energy expenditure will help you to lose weight. And to some degree, that is true. What James is referring to is your basal metabolic rate, and he has touched on that before. Your basal metabolic rate is basically the amount of calories that your body burns per day. But here's the big underlying problem with that statement. The big underlying problem is that if you undercut your calories, or you cut your calories down too low and you cut them beneath your BMR, your body will basically go into starvation mode, and your body will start to burn up other things like muscle tissue instead of using body fat. So the problem I have with this is that the information is incorrect and it is slightly outdated. It isn't as easy as calories in versus calories out. If it was that easy, then that message on its own is actually quite easy to follow, and most people could probably stick to that. Less calories in, more calories out, therefore that equals weight loss. But it just isn't quite that simple. The reason it's not that simple is because you have energy systems, such as your metabolism, and you also have hormones. And your energy systems and your hormones are there to govern how much energy you consume and how much energy you expend, okay? If you don't take those things into account, then it's actually quite hard to be able to get the body to lose weight. And I'll give you an example. A great example, and what I find with a few of my clients when I'm trying to help them to either lose weight or reverse their diabetes, is that there are two things that I try to get them to consider. The first thing is that if they've been consuming a pretty poor diet, or a diet with lots of refined sugars in, and refined food such as junk food and things of that nature, they tend to have a tolerance to their own insulin, which is what we call insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is actually quite a big hormonal imbalance, and basically insulin resistance is where the body isn't reading its own insulin anymore. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be people who have got type 2 diabetes. This can be people who are obese or clinically obese, or people who have got too much weight on their abdomen. And what that basically means is that their visceral fat, the organ fat in their body, is actually too high, and therefore the likelihood of them having insulin resistance is also quite high as well. So insulin resistance is one of the first things that you need to consider when you are trying to address your weight loss. The other thing is, as well, as when you look at energy systems such as your metabolism. So your metabolism is there to govern the amount of energy your body burns per day just by being you. So thinking, moving around, eating, breathing, sleeping, all of those things take energy, and that is all governed by what we call the basal metabolic rate, the BMR. So your basal metabolic rate is there to control the amount of calories going out of you, and also it needs to govern how many calories that you need per day. And there are certain hormones that your body releases so that you feel hungry, and there are certain hormones that your body releases to stop you from eating. Now, when you're looking at things such as the BMR, your basal metabolic rate, what I tell my clients is you must make sure that you don't undercut your BMR, okay? So your BMR, your basal metabolic rate, let's say that it expends X amount of calories per day, but you undercut that by less. So you're having less calories per day than what your BMR, your basal metabolic rate, governs. Therefore, what will happen is that your body is actually going to start to shut down and preserve the fuel that it does have, which is what we call body fat. So fuel reserve or body fat is less likely to be used when you're undercutting your calories too low. And how that happens is that, let's say that you've got a basal metabolic rate of a certain amount of energy expenditure per day. Let's just say that that number is 2,000 calories, just plucking a number out of the sky. Let's say that your basal metabolic rate is 2,000 calories per day. Then if I lower the amount of calories that I have in, what happens is to the metabolism is it burns lower. So rather than trying to lose weight where we need a higher burning metabolism to be able to help us to lose weight, we force it to lower because we're eating too little calories or too little energy. So what you need to be really careful of is that by undercutting your calories too low or too quickly will actually drop your metabolism, which will force your body to not lose weight and force your body not to burn fuel the way that you want it to be burnt, which is body fat. Is actually much more likely to start breaking down muscle tissue and turning the muscle tissue, which are basically amino acids, back into glucose, which is a form of sugar. So basically, if you starve yourself too much, your body will start to use its own muscle as energy fuel, which is not what you want at all. You want to be able to lose weight, ideally through body fat and also probably some visceral fat as well. So the way that you need to do that is you need to drop your energy intake over time, and that you need to make sure that you're kind of keeping a record of how much calories you're taking in per day and whether that's meeting the requirements that you need. Now, the requirements that you need are things such as your BMR, as I've said before, so your basal metabolic rate, but then you've got other things as well. So you've got social and work activities. They're really important to consider. And then on top of that, you've also got your exercise and things of that nature. So the two things that you need to consider are that if you're someone who's carrying too much weight, there could be a possibility that you're insulin resistant. And that will mean that the insulin, the hormone which governs all your macronutrients, which are fats, proteins, and carbohydrates, isn't working as well because your body isn't picking up on the hormone. It's just not picking up on that signal very well. The second thing that you need to consider is that your BMR, your basal metabolic rate, governs how much energy you spend per day just by being you. So if you undercut your calories too low, so if you undercut your calories super, super low, your body isn't going to be able to find that energy from the food intake that you're taking in. Therefore, it will start to burn other things. And quite often, that tends to be things such as muscle tissue, which kind of gets me onto my next point. So there is a professor called Tim Spector, and he has recently released a product called Zoe. And Zoe is basically a test kit. What it does is it uses a type 1 diabetic tracking system, which you place onto your arm, and it tracks the amount of blood glucose inside your blood, and it also tracks when you're eating glucose. So let's say that you have like a donut or something like that. If you ate a donut, the monitor would pick up that there's higher amounts of glucose in the blood at that time, and it would give you a readout on your smartphone. Yo bar, you know what to do. Like and subscribe to the channel. So what's interesting about Tim Spector's Zoe is that it wasn't initially a product. It was actually a study that was conducted by Tim Spector and probably other people that are on his team. And that it was there to study that when you consume highly processed food, such as something like a donut, when you consume it, it spikes your blood glucose and your insulin level then spikes and then brings that back down. And basically what insulin does is it's always trying to find homeostasis. So it's trying to find equilibrium. So if you have too much highly processed sugar, your insulin will spike, and then your insulin will bring that blood glucose back down, and it will bring it down below baseline. So you have a base level line, and basically too much insulin means that it drops it down too low too sharply, which gives you what we call a sugar crash. Now, that study has now turned into something which they sell called Zoe. And I completely understand why they've done it, because it probably expands the study, so it gives them more data, which in the long term will probably be really helpful for people who need to be able to look at concrete evidence to say that these types of foods that we eat are definitely wrong. But the one problem I've got with something like Zoe is the fact that although it is a clinical study to some degree, what they do in the test kits is they give you these muffins. And in these muffins, they've got certain amounts of carbohydrate in them or simple sugars to see how high your blood sugar goes and to see whether you're insulin resistant or not. But basically what they tell you is that they say to you that, oh, you're intolerant to taking on certain types of sugar, which isn't quite correct. Actually, what's happening is that you're insulin resistant. You're insulin resistant because your body is producing insulin, and it's producing probably more insulin than it needs to, because the insulin that is being produced isn't being recognized by the muscle cells. So basically, when you create insulin, when your pancreas creates insulin, it creates it to be able to do something with that sugar from that muffin that you've had. But if you're insulin resistant, basically that means that you can't use the insulin that well. You're not very good at using it because you've had too much of it. You've had too many doses of insulin, and that most likely is to do with the fact that you're having too much highly processed food. So at the basis of this, for me as a nutrition coach, is that Zoe basically is a test kit that's telling you not to eat processed food. Okay, and I wonder perhaps if it's like a study, but they're doing that, and they're, rather than telling you that you shouldn't eat processed food, they're giving it to you as an example. They're giving you a muffin, which is obviously a processed food, and then they're saying to you, look, by eating this muffin, it's spiking your glucose too high, and if you're not good at using that glucose within the muffin, you're not storing it properly, it means that you're insulin resistant. What I feel is that they should tell you this. I feel that they should be completely outright honest with you and say that by taking this test, it basically means that your body isn't using its hormones properly at its base. At its basic level, your body isn't using its hormones properly, probably because you consume too much highly processed food. And I think that's as simple as it needs to be, because what they then do is they then create you like a personal dietary plan, or they give you suggestions to say that you should eat more fruit, or you should eat more vegetables, or you should maybe consume more protein. Which gets me onto another thing with Tim Spector. The other thing with Tim Spector is what does annoy me is that he doesn't necessarily always think about the overall picture. When you read these studies, that have been done on diet, a lot of them are for global consumption. What do I mean by that? Well, when a study takes place, first of all, it takes a lot of money to be able to do a food study, like a really honest and open-hearted food study, a look at a certain type of food, like how much fat do we need, how much protein do we need, how much carbohydrate do we need, how much processed food can we consume without being too unhealthy. We like to do studies on that in science. And that's all fantastic. But what those studies do is they're basically looking at the overall. So they're looking at the overall population of people. They're not necessarily looking at the one individual. Now, you who's watching this video from me is thinking to yourself, well, I'm not that concerned about what's going on with the overall population. That's interesting factual information. That's information that I might need to consider. You know what to do, guys. Comment below and I will get back to you. You want to worry about your food intake, and you also want to worry about your weight loss, and I completely understand that. With Tim Spector, one of his statements that he comes out with is that you don't actually need to eat that much protein. He kind of considers that 0.8 grams of protein per kilo of body weight is enough, which I completely disagree with. And the reason that I disagree with that is because, one, it's probably not enough protein anyway. 0.8 grams of protein per kilo of body weight is actually undercutting the amount that you really need. Now, okay, if you're someone who sits at a desk all day, you're stagnant all day and you don't do very much, and you don't expend very much energy other than just working and maybe some social time, such as being social with your family and things like that, you're not a great exerciser, you're not someone who does a lot of exercise, then if you had a lower amount of protein per day, that would probably be okay because you're not doing that much. But if you're someone who is quite fit, or you're someone who does do a lot of exercise, even if you are carrying too much weight, but you're someone who really enjoys exercise, or you enjoy going to the gym, you enjoy outdoor activities, whether it's sports or whether it's leisure activities, you will need to be able to consume more protein. So therefore, when I'm training my clients, what I like to say to them is, do make sure that you get enough protein in. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you how much protein to have, because it's a recommendation, and actually everyone is different. Everyone has different requirements of protein, and that's what makes dieting so difficult. But I would suggest taking up more than 0.8 grams of protein per kilo. I'd probably more favour 0.8 grams of protein per 1 pound or 1.5 pounds of body weight, rather than working in kilos, because I just think that by undercutting protein so much, you're going to hinder the potential for you to grow more muscle tissue. And this is also what's interesting. When you grow more muscle tissue, you have an ability to store more glucose or glycogen. So glycogen are basically cluster forms of glucose. So your body can store more glycogen, which means that you can consume just that little bit more carbohydrate if you have more muscle tissue. Well, muscle tissue is supported by protein, which are branch chain amino acids. So just by consuming a little bit more protein in your diet, I do believe is going to help you. Now, here's the real kicker on the complete opposite end of the scale, is that if you consume too much protein, okay, so let's say that you're someone who's having 300 grams of protein per day, what's going to happen is that your body can't store amino acids, okay? Amino acids are the molecules that make up protein. Your body can't store those whatsoever. The only thing that your body can do is store two types of energy, and that energy is glycogen, which comes from glucose, but glycogen, which is basically sugar, which is inside the muscle tissue. And the second thing it can store is body fat. Now, we all know what body fat is because a lot of us carry, body fat around, but some of us carry more than others. And those people who carry more quite often want to try and lose it the best way that they can. But I always feel that it's important to teach the individual the real truth behind it, rather than trying to sell a product or sell a course or even try and sell coaching, which is what I do. I think to be honest with people and to be open with people about actually what's going on with their body, even if they don't quite understand it completely, get a little bit more knowledge and a little bit more insight, and that's what they're really looking for. So when it comes to things such as eating more protein, I would say try to just have a little bit more natural sources of protein in your diet rather than trying to undercut. The other thing with this Tim Spector is that he's not necessarily a social media person. He's a scientist at heart, and I completely respect that. And I respect, I've read his book, which is called Spoon Fed, and it's a really good book. But again, there's another little slight problem even with not necessarily his book, but the things that he says. If you haven't done already, guys, hit that little like button below and subscribe to the channel. So at the moment in the fitness industry and also in the science industry, there is this ongoing debate about the additive, the sweet additive aspartame. So aspartame basically is found in most diet drinks. It's prevalent in a lot of them. And James Smith has actually done a really fantastic video on aspartame, and I completely agree with what he says. But the overall findings is that someone like Tim Spector has got a problem with things like additives inside drinks. And I do understand where he's coming from. But in the research that I've done, when I've looked at aspartame, there are two things that stick out. The first thing is that when you consume these low-calorie drinks with aspartame inside it, actually doesn't have that much effect on the gut microbiome. So the gut microbiome is basically your bacteria inside your gut, and as long as it's healthy, it can actually support your system without any additives, which I mean things such as chemicals, such as antibiotics and stuff like that. So I believe that with a healthier gut microbiome, and the more that you support a healthy gut microbiome, you are more likely to be well. You're more likely to be a fit individual. And I don't just mean fit as in terms of how much output you can put inside the gym or whatever. I mean in terms of just being a well fit human being. So when you're looking at aspartame, it hits the gut microbiome. And from the studies that I have seen, and I'm not a guru on aspartame, but from the studies that I have seen, the gut microbiome doesn't really know what to do with it. So basically, you get this chemical inside your body, which, okay, has been man-made and is manufactured, and I completely understand all of that. But when it hits the gut microbiome, from what they can see, the gut microbiome doesn't really know what to do with it, because it's not good for you, and it's also not bad for you. It's a null and void. So what the gut microbiome does, it just passes it through the gut, and it just, it converts into other things, and the body can't use it. That's basically it. The second more important thing that I'd like to be able to touch on with aspartame, and where it's had kind of bad press from people such as Tim Spector and other people as well, is that aspartame is in low-calorie drinks, and the low-calorie drinks are actually more important than anything. When you look at general obesity, when you're looking at, like, when I'm working with type 2 diabetics, and I'm working with people who are morbidly obese, their main problem isn't aspartame. Their main problem is weight loss, and their weight gain, the weight that they're carrying at the moment, carries diseases. It carries diseases such as type 2 diabetes, which is what I specialize in, but it also carries things such as malnutrition and muscle wastage. So they have actually, although they're quite big people in terms of they're quite large people, you think they'd be quite strong, but actually they tend to be quite weak. And there's actually quite a lot of muscle wastage going on there because of basically, as I touched on before, the fact that they're insulin resistant. And so because they're insulin resistant, the macronutrients that they consume in their diet doesn't always necessarily target where it's supposed to be going, because what would help it target it is the insulin, the hormone. So when you're looking at these low-calorie drinks, diet drinks, let's call them, they are actually there to serve a purpose. They're there to be taken rather than someone taking a sugary drink. So if you look at a normal can of Coke, it will have X amount of sugar in that can of Coke. I think it's something like 28 teaspoons of sugar inside that one single can of Coke. Whereas you look at a Diet Coke, it's got hardly any sugar in it at all. Yes, it has additives such as aspartame, but it's not actually adding to the overall calorie intake. Therefore, that day or that particular time, that person isn't having so many calories. And it's the calories that are consumed in these vast quantities. So just by having something like a can of Coke, you're having a huge volume of calories in such a small liquid format that you're obviously going to put weight on, because you're having so much sugar, and that sugar's not even really being broken down. It's actually being absorbed by the stomach rather than actually being absorbed lower down in the digestive tract. So you're consuming huge volumes of calorie, which is then adding to your overall weight. Your overall weight is then going to be your biggest health concern. Your biggest health concern is going to be your obesity, okay? in the overall picture of things in time, okay, and time is always a big factor in everything when it comes to weight loss, but in time, I'm sure that they might come up and say, actually, aspartame isn't that great for you, and these are the reasons why. But from what we can see so far with the research that we do have, is to say that the study that they did on aspartame came from rats, not humans, it came from rats. And the amount of aspartame that the rats were consuming were vast quantities of aspartame, which we wouldn't even be able to consume per day, even if we tried. And if we did try, we'd probably be seriously ill, and so we wouldn't continue doing that. And that's why aspartame has got such a bad press, is it has come from a study that was done, but then a small piece of that study has been taken out and it's been manifested into something which it kind of isn't that important. When you're looking at things such as diet drinks, you're not necessarily picking on the good guy, but you're picking on something which is kind of irrelevant to the overall big picture. The overall big picture is that if you are obese, if you are type 2 diabetic, if you're someone who's got too much visceral fat inside too much organ fat inside your body, you are seriously unwell, and you are someone who is much more likely to develop cancer, dementia, heart disease, cardiovascular disease, as well as other things. But yeah, you're much more likely to develop life-threatening diseases rather than just when you're overweight, rather than just picking on something such as aspartame. I feel that it's much smaller issue rather than looking at the bigger issue, which is overall overall obesity. Overall clinical obesity is more of a problem. Yoba, if you haven't done already, please like and subscribe to the channel. Now, as a nutrition coach, what I like to do is I like to research other channels for inspiration. If I try and find channels which work with clients, such as I do, to try and give me a greater perspective on obesity, nutrition, type 2 diabetes, and anything else that goes in within those realms, I'm always trying to find channels that help support that, which helps me as a coach be able to guide my clients to get them the results that they want. There's one channel that I found recently which is called Mastering Diabetes, which is on Instagram. And they come from a basis of like more natural whole foods. So on the outline of it, it's like, great, more natural foods. But then when you start scrolling down, everything is vegetables and fruit, vegetables and fruit, vegetables and fruit, loads of salad. But they're posting things on their site, such as like, don't consume oils, don't consume any oils. Now, I completely agree to a point, and I've said it in a previous video as well. Don't consume processed oils such as things like rapeseed, vegetable oil, sunflower seed oil. Those things have been proven not to be very good for you. But what they're also cutting out within the oils and fats category are things such as butter, things such as olive oil, which are proven to be heart healthy. They're things that actually improve your overall ability to not only consume fat as a source of energy, which is what you should be doing, but also to be helping lowering things such as inflammatory markers and also lowering things such as cholesterol. The other thing is as well is that on that channel, there's nothing there that really gives you a good idea of anything such as protein. Again, that particular channel has undercut two major macronutrients, which are fats and proteins. So all they're saying to you is, if you're type 2 diabetic, then just rely on fiber as your number one cure. Fiber, vegetables and fruit have got everything in them that the body needs, which is absolute bollocks, because it's not everything that the body needs. You didn't just go around pre-agriculture consuming tons and tons of fruit and vegetables. It just wouldn't have been possible. You know, fruit and vegetables are only here because of agriculture. But before that time, we wouldn't have been consuming tons of fruit. We just wouldn't have been able to, okay? Plus, not only the fact that if you are a type 2 diabetic or you are someone who's clinically obese, you need to be able to gauge how much fruit intake you need. Because again, with fruit, it's got fructose in it, which is then converted into glucose. And if you've got too much glucose going into the body and you are someone who's insulin resistant or you are someone who's type 2 diabetic, that's not going to be very good for you. It's not actually going to help you in the long term. Now, you've got dietary fibers, okay? You've got soluble and insoluble fiber, which is inside fruits and different things of that nature, vegetables and seeds and things like that. And that is all necessary. But they're not the be all and end all of how to lose weight. They're not the be all and end all of how to lose weight. If you're someone now who's watching this video and you think to yourself, oh, I'll just consume more vegetables or consume more fruit, you're not going to win. You might lose weight, but it'll probably be the worst weight to lose, which in my opinion is muscle tissue. I think that the best weight to gain is muscle tissue, and the weight that you want to lose is body fat. But you have to include the other two macronutrients into that. You have to include protein and you have to include fat. If you don't include those things, then you're basically fucked. You're just not going to be able to get to where you want to be with your overall weight loss. And this is what I've got a problem with when it comes to people like James Smith, who I really like James Smith. I think he does a great job. Tim Spector and Zoe. And then you look at Mastering Diabetes, which is his Instagram channel. They all do good things, but they do them in the wrong order. They're always completely missing out massive stacks of information, or they're personifying on such a small amount of information that for the general population doesn't really matter. In fact, it doesn't really matter to the individual, because I'd never say to someone, oh, you know, just eat fruit, just eat vegetables. Like, people pay for my nutrition coaching and they have to pay quite a lot of money. I don't know what type of coach I'd be if I just said to them, just eat fruit. Just eat fruit and you'll probably lose some weight. What you're going to have to do, like eat your body weight in fruit every day. First of all, you'll probably over-consume the amount of sugar that you need, which is no good for you if you're type 2 diabetic. But also, you know, undercutting, again, as I've said, the macronutrients is just not going to help you whatsoever. You need balance. What you need is you need to consider more whole foods as best you can versus convenience foods, basically. So I was someone myself who actually really used to like having protein shakes. I used to love having protein shakes because one, they were convenient, two, they were a great snack to have. I always enjoyed the flavor and taste of them. And I always felt like I could control the amount of calories that I was getting into my active day by having a protein shake. And I would make it with milk, or I'd make it with soya milk, or I'd make it with water, whatever. But basically, I always felt that protein shakes were the way forward, and I had protein shakes probably for over a decade. But in reading a study with protein shakes is that they're processed, okay? The protein powder is a form of process, and therefore it's not come from its natural source. So what's happening is you're stripping probably a lot of the good out. You're probably not having quite as good a quality of protein as you think you are. That's the first thing. And the second thing, which is probably even more important, is that when you're consuming protein powder, it acts like sugar because it's powder. It's a refined form of protein. And therefore, it probably does have some benefit, but not as great a benefit as you might think it does. Because basically, what's happening is that protein is being broken down in the stomach too quickly. Therefore, it's more likely to be turned into fat than it is to be used to build more muscle tissue. So I thought to myself, well, what do I need to do then? So what I started doing is I actually started replacing protein shakes with having some natural Greek yogurt blended with some berries in some soy milk or cow's milk. I don't mind either way. That is actually a natural protein shake. It's a protein shake which has got natural forms of protein in it, which are, you know, the amino acids that you find. But it's not been processed, or it's not been processed as much. Yes, yogurt has been processed. It's been processed into yogurt. I get that, but at the real crux of the dilemma that I was having is that I didn't need to consume protein powder anymore. I felt that consuming protein powder actually wasn't doing me any good. And that's what I feel individuals really need to take home from this video. What you need to take home is that if you can start to just improve the food that you choose to eat versus the convenience food that you have, is going to be much, much better for you long term. You're actually going to lose weight. You're going to lose weight more sensibly, more consistently. You're going to feel better. You're going to feed your gut microbiome, which is a massive subject on its own. But you're going to feed your gut microbiome better. You're going to be less insulin resistant and more tolerant to your own insulin, which is important if you are diabetic or even someone who's just very, very overweight. There will be some insulin resistance issues that you have. You probably don't know it yet, but there will be. And just looking for better foods. So when you're looking at these social media gurus, and I understand that I'm on social media and I'm probably taking a bite out of my own cookie in a way, but when you're looking at these people who are on social media, you need to think to yourself, are they trying to sell you the content, or are they trying to pitch the content to you to make you watch the video, or are you actually getting some core information from what they're giving you? I think that all these people, such as James Smith and Tim Spector with Zoe and Mastering Diabetes on Instagram, I think they're all giving you information. But what I think that they're also doing is they're not giving the full picture. They're not giving you the full story. And I think that that's actually quite crucial, to have the full story, to have the full picture, to have the right amount of knowledge and where to direct that knowledge is going to be the thing that helps you to win. It's going to help you lose weight, and it's going to help you defeat other problems such as morbid obesity, diabetes, and other things that are within that realm, other things that are linked within that realm.
It's the Yo Series.